Growing up, I always felt like something was missing. My parents, Robert and Margaret Thompson, insisted I was their only child, but deep down, I knew they were hiding something. At 28, I finally hired a private investigator to dig into my family's past. What she uncovered about my three siblings changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Lucy Thompson, and until 6 months ago, I believed I was an only child living in Portland, Oregon. My childhood was quiet, almost too quiet. While my friends complained about annoying brothers and sisters, I spent my days alone in our spacious house on Maple Street, creating imaginary playmates to fill the silence. My parents were successful professionals. Dad worked as an architect for a prestigious firm downtown, and Mom was a pediatric nurse at Oregon Health Sciences University. They provided everything I needed: piano lessons, art classes, summer camps, and eventually college tuition. But there was always an undercurrent of sadness in our home that I couldn't quite understand. The first red flag appeared when I was 12. While helping Mom organize old photo albums, I found a picture tucked behind another photograph. It showed a young girl, maybe 5 years old, with dark curly hair just like mine, standing in what looked like our backyard. The girl wasn't me. I remembered having straight hair until I was 7. "Who's this, Mom?" I asked, holding up the photo. Mom's face went completely pale. She snatched the picture from my hand so quickly that she tore the corner. "Oh, that's just a neighbor's child who used to play here sometimes. Nothing important." But her hands were shaking as she stuffed the photo into her pocket. That night, I heard my parents having a hushed, intense conversation behind their closed bedroom door. I pressed my ear against the wood, but could only make out fragments. Should have thrown those away. And "she's asking questions." The second incident happened during my junior year of high school. I was filling out college applications and needed my birth certificate. Mom said she'd get it for me, but weeks passed with various excuses. Finally, I went to the county records office myself. The clerk, a friendly woman named Janet, helped me request the document. But when it arrived, something was off. The birth certificate looked newer than it should have been, and there was a strange notation in the margin that I didn't understand. "Excuse me," I said to Janet, "what does this code mean here?" She adjusted her glasses and looked at the document. Her expression grew puzzled. "That's odd. This notation usually indicates an amended birth certificate. Someone requested changes to the original document, but I can't access those records without special authorization." I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of changes? Could be anything: name corrections, parent information updates, sometimes even sibling additions or removals if there were custody issues. That night at dinner, I confronted my parents about the amended birth certificate. Dad's fork clattered against his plate, and Mom started crying, not the gentle tears I'd seen before, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs. "Sweetheart," Dad said carefully, "sometimes legal documents need to be updated for various reasons. It doesn't mean anything significant." But Mom couldn't stop crying, and Dad looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I knew they were lying, but I was 17 and had no idea how to pursue the truth further. College at University of Washington provided a temporary distraction. I threw myself into my psychology studies, perhaps subconsciously trying to understand my own family dynamics. But even surrounded by friends and activities, I felt incomplete, like I was missing puzzle pieces that would help me understand who I really was. After graduation, I moved back to Portland and started working as a counselor for troubled teens. Every day, I helped kids navigate family trauma, abandonment issues, and identity crises. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was trying to help others find themselves when I felt completely lost about my own origins. My parents seemed relieved that I'd stopped asking questions about the past. We settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners and holiday celebrations. But underneath the normalcy, the unanswered questions festered like an infected wound. Everything changed last December when Mom had a minor stroke. During her recovery, she developed a condition called disinhibition, where the brain's filtering system becomes impaired. Essentially, she started saying things she'd normally keep hidden. I was visiting her in the hospital when she grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. Lucy, she whispered urgently, I need to tell you about your brothers and sisters before it's too late. My heart stopped. What brothers and sisters? But before she could answer, Dad walked into the room. The moment he saw Mom's expression and my shocked face, he knew exactly what was happening. Margaret, you need to rest, he said firmly, moving to her bedside. Lucy, maybe you should go home. Your mother needs sleep. No, Dad, she was about to tell me something important about my siblings. Dad's face crumpled in defeat. Not here, not like this. Mom's eyes had already glazed over again, the moment of clarity gone. But those words, your brothers and sister, echoed in my mind for weeks. I tried talking to Dad multiple times after that, but he'd built walls around the subject that seemed impenetrable. He'd change the topic, leave the room, or simply say, some things are better left in the past, Lucy. But I couldn't let it go. At 28, I deserved to know the truth about my family. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. Rachel Martinez came highly recommended from a friend who'd used her services during a messy divorce. Rachel was a former police detective who'd started her own agency specializing in family investigations and missing persons cases. I need you to find out if I have siblings, I told her during our first meeting at her downtown office. My parents have been lying to me my entire life, and I need to know the truth. Rachel listened patiently as I explained the mysterious photograph, the amended birth certificate, and Mom's hospital confession. She took detailed notes and asked probing questions about my parents' backgrounds, our family history, and any other unusual incidents I could remember. This type of case isn't uncommon, she said. Families hide siblings for various reasons: custody disputes, financial issues, adoption complications, sometimes even more serious situations. I'll start with public records and work backward from there. She warned me that the investigation could take several weeks and might uncover painful truths. Are you prepared for the possibility that what we find might be difficult to process? I thought about spending the rest of my life wondering, always feeling like something was missing. I need to know, regardless of how painful it might be. 2 weeks later, Rachel called me with preliminary findings that made my hands shake as I held the phone. Lucy, I found them. You have 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. And this story goes much deeper than I initially expected. I met Rachel at a coffee shop in downtown Portland the next morning. She arrived carrying a thick manila folder and wore the serious expression of someone about to deliver life-changing news. Before I show you what I found, Rachel said, sliding into the booth across from me, I need you to understand that your parents weren't just keeping siblings from you. They were part of a much larger cover-up involving the state child welfare system. She opened the folder and pulled out several documents. The first was a family court record from 1995, when I was barely a year old. According to the paperwork, there had been 4 Thompson children originally: myself, twin brothers named Marcus and David, who were 3 years older, and a sister named Elena, who was 5. Your biological parents were Robert and Margaret Thompson, just like you always knew. But in 1994, there was a house fire at your original family home in Salem, Oregon. Your father was working late that night, and your mother was... She was struggling with prescription drug addiction following complications from your birth. The documents painted a devastating picture. Mom had been taking painkillers after a difficult cesarean section and had gradually become dependent. The night of the fire, she'd taken too many pills and fallen asleep while cooking dinner. The kitchen caught fire, and by the time neighbors called the fire department, half the house was engulfed in flames. Your siblings were all hospitalized for smoke inhalation, Rachel continued. You were the least affected because your crib was in the master bedroom, farthest from the kitchen. But Child Protective Services got involved because of your mother's condition and what they classified as criminal neglect. I stared at a hospital photo showing 4 small children in beds.
I recognized my own infant face, but seeing my siblings, Marcus with his serious dark eyes, David grinning despite the oxygen mask, and Elena holding a stuffed rabbit, felt like looking at ghosts. What happened to them? Rachel pulled out another document. The state separated all of you temporarily while your parents went through rehabilitation and legal proceedings. You were placed with a foster family called the Hendersons in Portland. Marcus and David went to a group home in Eugene. Elena was placed with a family in Bend who were considering adoption. According to the records, the plan had been to reunite the family once Robert and Margaret completed their requirements. Dad had to undergo financial counseling because he'd been hiding debt, and Mom needed to complete addiction treatment and parenting classes. Your parents did everything the state asked, Rachel said. They moved to Portland to be closer to you, got new jobs, and completed all their programs. But here's where things got complicated.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. She showed me a series of legal documents that made my stomach drop. While my parents were jumping through hoops to regain custody, Elena's foster family in Bend had filed for adoption. They claimed Elena had bonded with them and that returning her to Robert and Margaret would be traumatic. The court case dragged on for months. Your parents were spending thousands on legal fees, fighting for Elena while also trying to regain custody of you and the twins. But then something happened that changed everything. In March 1996, Marcus had suffered a severe asthma attack at the group home. The staff had been slow to respond, and he'd been hospitalized in critical condition. While he survived, the incident exposed serious problems at the facility. When David tried to run away to find Marcus, he was injured by a staff member who used excessive force to restrain him. Your parents were faced with an impossible choice, Rachel explained. They could take back custody of you, the baby who'd suffered the least trauma and adapted well to foster care, or they could keep fighting for all 4 children while you remained in an unstable system. The documents showed that my parents' lawyer had advised them that their best chance of keeping any child was to focus their resources on me. The court was willing to terminate their rights to the other 3 if they agreed to favorable adoption arrangements and stopped fighting the legal battles. So they chose you, I whispered, feeling sick. They chose to give you a stable life rather than risk losing all 4 children to the system indefinitely. It wasn't an easy decision, Lucy. I found therapy records showing your mother attempted suicide twice during this period. Rachel showed me the final court documents. In August 1996, Robert and Margaret Thompson officially relinquished their parental rights to Marcus, David, and Elena. Marcus and David were adopted by their group home director, a man named Kenneth Walsh, who ran a ranch for troubled boys outside Eugene. Elena's adoption by the Bend family was finalized. My parents received full custody of me and were allowed to move anywhere they wanted. They moved you to the house on Maple Street and essentially started over, Rachel said. New neighborhood, new friends, new life. The court sealed all the records as part of the agreement. I stared at photos of my siblings' new families. Marcus and David, now called Marcus and David Walsh, were pictured at the ranch with several other boys and their adoptive father. Elena, now Elena Rodriguez, was shown at a birthday party with her new parents and what appeared to be an older adopted brother. Where are they now? Rachel pulled out recent photographs that made my heart race. Marcus, now 31, worked as a park ranger in Montana. The photo showed a tall, serious-looking man with dark hair and the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. David had become a social worker in Seattle. His picture revealed a warmer expression, but unmistakably similar features to both Marcus and myself. And Elena? Elena is a teacher in Phoenix. She's married with 2 young children. The photo showed a woman who looked startlingly like me, but with longer hair and a bright smile as she posed with her students. Where are they now? Rachel pulled out recent photographs that made my heart race. Marcus, now 31, worked as a park ranger in Montana.
The photo showed a tall, serious-looking man with dark hair and the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. David had become a social worker in Seattle. His picture revealed a warmer expression, but unmistakably similar features to both Marcus and myself. And Elena? Elena is a teacher in Phoenix. She's married with 2 young children. The photo showed a woman who looked startlingly like me, but with longer hair and a bright smile as she posed with her students. Do they know about me? That's the most heartbreaking part, Rachel said quietly. I managed to speak with Marcus yesterday. He spent years wondering what happened to his baby sister. They all remember you, Lucy. Elena kept that stuffed rabbit from the hospital for over a decade, hoping she'd see you again someday. The revelation that my siblings had been thinking about me all these years while I'd been living my life unaware of their existence felt overwhelming. I started crying right there in the coffee shop, mourning the relationships I'd never had and the family experiences I'd missed. There's more, Rachel said gently. Your parents have been sending money. She showed me bank records indicating that Robert and Margaret had been making monthly payments to a trust fund for 27 years. The fund had been split between my 3 siblings and was designed for college expenses and emergencies. They never forgot about them, I realized. Your parents made a sacrifice that haunted them every day for nearly 3 decades. They gave up 3 children to ensure at least one would have a stable, loving home, but they never stopped caring about Marcus, David, and Elena. Looking at the evidence spread across the table, I finally understood why my parents had seemed perpetually sad, why family photos felt incomplete, and why they'd never been able to discuss the past. They'd been living with an impossible loss for my entire life. I need to meet them, I said. Rachel nodded. I thought you might say that. I have contact information for all 3, but Lucy, you need to be prepared. They have their own lives now, their own families, and approaching them will force you to confront your parents about decades of secrecy. As I walked home that afternoon, my entire identity felt shifted. I wasn't an only child. I was the youngest of 4 siblings who'd been torn apart by tragedy and impossible circumstances. The quiet house on Maple Street suddenly felt different, not peaceful, but hollow, like a monument to loss. That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at my phone and the contact information for Marcus Walsh in Montana. My finger hovered over the call button for an hour before I finally found the courage to dial. The phone rang 3 times before a deep voice answered. Hello? My throat went completely dry. Is this Marcus Walsh? Yeah, who's this? My name is Lucy Thompson. I think you might be my brother. The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. Lucy? Baby Lucy, from the hospital? Yes. Oh my God, Elena, David, get over here right now. I could hear commotion in the background, voices getting closer to the phone. Lucy, where are you? How did you find us? Are you okay? The emotion in his voice broke something open inside me. I'm in Portland. I hired a private investigator because my parents never told me about you guys. I just found out yesterday that I have siblings. They never told you? David's voice came through. Apparently, Marcus had put me on speaker. We've been looking for you for years. We hired our own investigator when we turned 18, but all the records were sealed. Is this really happening? That was Elena's voice, and she was crying. Lucy, I have your picture from the hospital. I've carried it in my wallet for 27 years. For the next 2 hours, we stayed on that phone call, sharing our lives across the decades we'd missed. Marcus told me about growing up on Kenneth Walsh's ranch with David and 12 other boys who'd been removed from their families. Kenneth, who they called Papa Ken, had created a structured environment focused on outdoor work, education, and therapy. It wasn't easy, Marcus explained. Papa Ken was tough but fair. He made us all work on the ranch, feeding cattle, fixing fences, maintaining equipment. But he also made sure we finished school and dealt with our trauma. David and I both went to college on scholarships he helped us get. David had become a social worker specifically because of his experience in the system. I wanted to help other kids who went through what we did. But Marcus, he went the opposite direction. He wanted to get as far away from people as possible. That's not exactly true, Marcus protested. I just found peace in the wilderness. Being a park ranger lets me protect something beautiful instead of always dealing with what's broken. Elena's story was different. Her adoptive parents, Carlos and Maria Rodriguez, had immigrated from Mexico and were unable to have biological children. They'd showered Elena with love and opportunities, but she'd never stopped wondering about her original family. I became a teacher because I wanted to help children who seemed lost or alone, Elena said. My husband thinks I take on too many troubled kids as projects, but I can't help it. I see myself in every child who looks like they're missing something important. They wanted to know everything about my life, my job as a counselor, my college years, whether I was married, what Robert and Margaret were like as parents. When I described our quiet house and my lonely childhood, Elena started crying again. "We could have been there for you," she whispered. "You shouldn't have grown up alone." Marcus's voice turned harder. "And Robert and Margaret let you believe you had no family for 28 years? That's not right, Lucy." I found myself defending my parents, explaining what Rachel had discovered about their impossible choice and the monthly payments to the trust fund. But my siblings' anger was palpable through the phone. "Money doesn't replace having a sister," David said. "We had a right to know where you were, and you had a right to know about us." We made plans to meet in person. Elena could fly up from Phoenix the following weekend, and Marcus and David could drive down from Montana and Seattle. They wanted to confront Robert and Margaret together, as a family. "Are you ready for that?" Elena asked. "Because once we knock on their door, there's no going back. Everything changes." I wasn't ready, but I agreed anyway. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling completely overwhelmed. In one phone call, I'd gone from being an only child to having 3 siblings who wanted to immediately reshape our family dynamic. The intensity of their emotions, their anger at my parents, their grief over lost time, their desperate need to reconnect, felt suffocating. The next few days were a whirlwind of text messages, phone calls, and planning. Marcus sent photos from his ranger station in Glacier National Park. David shared stories from his work at a Seattle nonprofit. Elena texted pictures of her children, my nephew and niece I'd never known existed. But as the weekend approached, I started having second thoughts. These were essentially strangers who shared my DNA. We had no real relationship, no shared memories beyond a hospital room when I was an infant. They were grieving a sister they'd lost, but that sister was a fantasy based on a baby they'd barely known. I was a different person than whoever they'd been imagining all these years. Friday evening, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be our last normal dinner together. Mom was back home from her rehabilitation, moving slowly but steadily improving. Dad was grilling salmon on the back patio, the same ritual we'd had dozens of times. "You seem quiet tonight, sweetheart," Mom said as we ate. "Is everything okay at work?" I looked at these people who'd raised me, sacrificed for me, loved me unconditionally for 28 years. They looked older than I'd noticed before, worn down by decades of carrying their secret. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something." Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Mom's eyes immediately filled with worry. "I hired a private investigator. I know about Marcus, David, and Elena." The salmon fell off Dad's fork onto his plate. Mom's face went completely white. Then she started that deep, heartbreaking crying I'd witnessed in the hospital. "Oh, Lucy," Dad whispered, "we wanted to tell you so many times." "They're coming here tomorrow," I continued. "All 3 of them. They want to meet me, and they want to talk to you." Mom stood up abruptly and rushed to the bathroom. I could hear her being sick through the thin walls. Dad buried his face in his hands. We hoped, maybe it would be easier if you never knew what you'd lost." "But I did lose something, Dad. I felt it my entire childhood. I knew something was missing." "Your mother has never forgiven herself for that night. The fire, the pills, losing the other children, it nearly destroyed her. We moved here to start fresh, to give you the best life possible. I know you did your best. Rachel showed me all the court documents. I understand why you made the choices you made. Dad looked up with tears in his eyes. Do you hate us? No. But I'm angry that you never gave me the choice to know them. They've been looking for me, Dad. They've been grieving me for 27 years while I was right here in Portland. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the phone call with my siblings, their immediate acceptance and desperate need for connection. But I also thought about my parents, who'd been living with guilt and loss every day while trying to give me a normal childhood. Saturday morning arrived gray and rainy, typical Portland weather. I'd arranged for everyone to meet at my parents' house at noon. Marcus and David had driven through the night and were staying at a hotel near the airport. Elena's flight had landed at 10. At 11:45, I was sitting in my car in my parents' driveway, watching 3 rental cars pull up to the curb. My siblings stepped out into the rain, and for the first time in 27 years, all 4 Thompson children were in the same place. Marcus was taller than I'd expected, with calloused hands and the weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. David had a gentler appearance, but the same intense dark eyes. Elena looked so much like me that several neighbors stopped their Saturday morning activities to stare. Are you ready for this? Elena asked as we stood together on the front porch. I looked at the house where I'd grown up, where my parents were probably watching us through the living room window, and realized that nothing would ever be the same after we walked through that door. No, I said, but let's do it anyway. I rang the doorbell to my own childhood home. Dad opened the door, and I watched 27 years of carefully constructed normalcy crumble in his expression. His eyes moved from me to Marcus, then David, then Elena, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and something that looked like relief mixed with terror. Robert, Marcus said, his voice steady but cold. Dad stepped back wordlessly, and we filed into the living room where I'd spent countless childhood evenings watching television and doing homework. Mom was sitting on the couch, clutching a tissue box, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw my siblings, she let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "My babies," she whispered. "Look how grown up you are." The tension in the room was suffocating. Marcus and David remained standing, their arms crossed. Elena sat on the edge of an armchair, perched like she might flee at any moment. I found myself caught between 2 families, the parents who'd raised me and the siblings I was just meeting.
We remember you, David said to Mom, his social worker training evident in his controlled tone. We remember the fire, the hospital, being taken away. What we don't understand is how you could take Lucy back and just forget about us. Dad's hands were shaking as he sat down beside Mom. We never forgot about you, not for one day. But you let us think we'd been abandoned, Elena said, tears starting to fall. I spent my entire childhood wondering if I'd done something wrong, if that's why my real family didn't want me anymore. It wasn't like that, Mom said, finding her voice. The court gave us an impossible choice. We could fight for all of you and probably lose everyone, or we could save one child and give her the stable home she deserved. Marcus's composure finally cracked. You could have tried harder. You could have kept fighting instead of just giving up on 3 of your children. We spent every penny we had on legal fees, Dad shot back, standing up. We mortgaged this house twice. Your mother was hospitalized after 2 suicide attempts because losing you was killing her. The lawyers told us that continuing to fight would likely result in Lucy going back into foster care too. So you chose her, David said quietly. You chose Lucy over us. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt responsible for my siblings' pain, guilty for the childhood I'd received while they'd grown up without their real parents. We chose to give one of our children a chance at a normal family life, Mom said, her voice stronger now. Every night for 27 years, I've gone to bed wondering if we made the right choice. But looking at Lucy now, seeing the woman she became, I know we gave her something we couldn't have provided if we'd kept fighting and lost everything. Elena pulled out her wallet and showed them the hospital photograph she'd carried all these years. I showed this to my children last week and told them they had an aunt they'd never met. My 4-year-old daughter asked me why families get broken. What was I supposed to tell her? Tell her that sometimes adults have to make terrible decisions to protect the people they love, Dad said. Tell her that we loved you so much, we were willing to live with the pain of losing you if it meant you'd have better lives. Marcus walked to the mantelpiece where my school photos chronicled my growth from elementary through college graduation. She had piano recitals, didn't she? Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Yes, Mom whispered. We had none of that with you. Papa Ken was good to us, but he wasn't our father. The Rodriguez family loved Alina, but they weren't her real parents. We lost our family, and you got to keep being parents. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You're making it sound like they didn't suffer. Look at them. Really look at them. They've been living with this loss every single day. Lucy's right, David said, his professional objectivity kicking in. I can see the trauma in both of you, but that doesn't erase our trauma or the fact that we deserved to know Lucy existed. Dad walked to a closet and pulled out a large box I'd never seen before. Inside were hundreds of items, report cards from Marcus and David's schools, Elena's art projects, newspaper clippings about their achievements, photographs taken from a distance at graduations and sporting events. We've been watching you your entire lives, Dad said. We knew when Marcus got his ranger certification, when David graduated social work school, when Elena got married. We've been to every major event, just from far away. Elena picked up a photograph of her wedding day. In the background, barely visible behind other guests, were Robert and Margaret. You were there? We were always there, Mom said. We couldn't be part of your lives, but we needed to know you were okay, that you were happy. Marcus found a folder containing financial records, not just the trust fund payments Rachel had discovered, but emergency funds sent when David needed car repairs in college, anonymous donations to Elena's classroom supply drives, and money sent to cover Marcus's medical bills after a hiking accident. You've been taking care of us, Marcus realized, his anger starting to shift into something more complex. We never stopped being your parents, Mom said. We just had to learn how to love you from a distance. The conversation continued for hours. My siblings shared stories about their childhoods, Marcus's struggles with abandonment issues that led him to seek solitude in nature, David's decision to become a social worker to help other separated families, Elena's compulsive need to nurture every child in her classroom because she couldn't nurture her own siblings. My parents explained the therapy they'd undergone, the marriage counseling required to survive their grief, the way they'd structured my childhood to make sure I never felt the instability they'd experienced with my siblings. We overprotected Lucy, Dad admitted. We were so terrified of losing another child that we probably held her too close. I felt it, I said. Not the overprotection, but the sadness underneath everything. Our house always felt incomplete. As the afternoon wore on, the initial anger began giving way to a more complicated mix of emotions. Elena showed pictures of her children, my nephew Jake, who was 6, and my niece Sophie, who was 4. Marcus talked about his work protecting wilderness areas, explaining how he'd found peace in spaces where families of animals stayed together instinctively. David described his clients, children in foster care, who reminded him of his own experience. I became good at my job because I understood what it felt like to lose your family overnight, but I also spent years being angry about our situation. Are you still angry? Mom asked. David considered the question carefully. I'm angry about the system that forced you to choose. I'm angry about the years we lost. But looking at these photos, seeing how you never really let us go, I think I understand why you made the decision you did. Mom reached into the box and pulled out 4 small items, hospital bracelets from when we were all patients after the fire. She'd kept them all these years. I never threw anything away, she said. Your rooms upstairs, we kept them exactly as they were when you left. Lucy never knew, but this house has always been ready for you to come home. Elena started crying harder. Can we see them? We went upstairs to the rooms I'd assumed were just storage spaces. Behind doors I'd been told contained Christmas decorations and old furniture were 2 bedrooms frozen in time. Beds made with superhero sheets, toys arranged on shelves, children's clothes hanging in closets. Elena's room had a princess theme with a dollhouse I'd never seen. Her stuffed rabbit from the hospital photo sat on the pillow, waiting. Marcus and David's shared room was decorated with dinosaurs and space themes. 2 twin beds sat side by side, and a bookshelf held picture books about adventure and exploration. "You kept our rooms," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. "We kept everything," Dad replied. "We couldn't keep you, but we kept every piece of who you were." Standing in those preserved childhood bedrooms, surrounded by the ghosts of family life that should have been, we all finally broke down completely. The tears that came weren't just about loss anymore, but about a love that had survived decades of separation and silence. For the first time since walking into the house, my siblings hugged our parents. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was acknowledgement that everyone had been wounded by circumstances beyond any of their control. "What happens now?" Elena asked as we sat back down in the living room, all of us emotionally exhausted. That question would change everything once again. Elena's question, "What happens now?" hung in the air as we all realized we were standing at a crossroads none of us had really prepared for. Finding each other was one thing. Building a real family relationship after nearly 3 decades apart was something entirely different. "I think," David said slowly, "we need to be honest about what we're all hoping for here. Because I can already feel us trying to fast forward through 27 years of separation, and that's not healthy for anyone." Marcus nodded. "David's right. I drove down here angry and ready to confront the people who abandoned us. But sitting in my childhood bedroom, I realize I'm grieving something that maybe never really existed in the first place." "What you mean?" I asked. "I've been holding on to the fantasy of a family that was torn apart," Marcus explained. "But we were so young when it happened. The family I remember, the 4 kids playing together, the normal home life, that might have only existed for a few months before the fire changed everything." Elena was turning her wedding photo over in her hands. "I've spent my entire adult life telling people I'm adopted, that my real family abandoned me. But now I'm sitting here looking at parents who never really abandoned us at all. I don't know how to reconcile that." Mom reached across the coffee table and touched Elena's hand. "You don't have to reconcile anything right now, sweetheart. We have time." "Do we?" David asked. "I live in Seattle. Marcus is in Montana. Elena's in Phoenix. Lucy's here in Portland. We all have established lives, jobs, relationships. I want to know you all, but I can't uproot everything to play house." The practical reality of adult sibling relationships was settling in. Unlike childhood siblings who grow up together, building shared experiences and memories gradually, we were trying to force an instant family bond between people who were essentially strangers. "Maybe we start small," I suggested. "Regular phone calls, visits when we can manage them. We don't have to make up for 27 years all at once." "I'd like that," Elena said. "My kids are dying to meet their aunt and uncles. Could you all come to Phoenix for Christmas? It might be nice to have a first holiday together away from all this emotional intensity." Marcus looked skeptical. "Elena, your kids don't know us. We don't know them. It might be overwhelming for everyone." "Or it might be exactly what we need," Elena countered. "Kids don't carry the same baggage adults do. They'll just see new family members to play with." Dad cleared his throat. "What about us? Are we invited to be part of this family again?" The question created another moment of heavy silence. My siblings exchanged glances, having a conversation with their eyes that I wasn't part of. "I need time," Marcus said finally. "I understand why you made the choices you did, but I can't just flip a switch and go back to calling you Mom and Dad. The people who raised me are Papa Ken and the other boys at the ranch. You're Lucy's parents who happen to share our DNA." Mom's face crumpled, but Dad put his arm around her. "We understand. We hope that someday you might want us in your lives, but we don't expect it." "It's not about expectation," David said. "It's about figuring out how to build new relationships without pretending the old ones can just be resurrected. I work with families in crisis every day,
And the ones that heal best are the ones that acknowledge their reality instead of chasing fantasies. Over the next few hours, we started making actual plans instead of just processing emotions. Elena would send photos and videos of her children. Marcus would share stories and pictures from his work in the national parks. David would visit Portland once a month for work anyway, and could spend time with me and our parents. "What about the trust fund money?" Elena asked. "We found out about the payments you've been making all these years." "That money was always meant for you," Dad said. "Education, emergencies, down payments on houses, whatever you need." "I used mine for my kids' college funds," Elena said. "I never knew where the money came from, but it felt important to pass it on to the next generation." Marcus had used his portion to buy land adjacent to a national forest, where he'd built a small cabin and worked on wildlife conservation projects. David had started a nonprofit that helped aging out foster kids find stable housing and employment. We've all been trying to fix what was broken, I realized. Elena nurtures children who need extra attention. David helps kids who lose their families. Marcus protects spaces where families can stay together. Even I became a counselor working with troubled teens. "And you, Lucy?" Mom asked. "What do you want from all this?" I thought about that question for a long time. I want to know my siblings as adults, not as the children they were when I was a baby. I want to understand who you really are, not just the sad parents I grew up with. And I want to stop feeling like something's missing all the time. As evening approached, we were all exhausted from the emotional marathon. Elena's flight back to Phoenix was the next morning, and Marcus and David needed to start driving back to their respective homes. "Before you all leave," Mom said, "there's one more thing I need to show you." She went to the garage and returned with 4 small boxes, each labeled with one of our names. Inside were items she'd saved from our earliest childhood: baby teeth, first drawings, locks of hair from first haircuts, report cards from preschool. "I saved everything," she said. "Every milestone, every memory. I couldn't be part of your lives, but I documented what I could." Elena's box contained a recording Mom had made of her singing a lullaby when Elena was 3. Marcus's had a picture he'd drawn of the family before the fire, 4 stick figures holding hands with "My Family" written in crayon across the top. David's contained a letter he'd dictated to a teacher when he was 5, asking Santa to bring his baby sister back. My box was different. It contained letters my parents had written to my siblings over the years, but never sent. Birthday messages, graduation congratulations, updates about my life they thought might interest them. "You wrote to us?" David asked, holding a letter dated on his 18th birthday. "Every major holiday, every birthday, every time something reminded us of you," Dad said. "We needed to feel connected somehow." Reading those letters was like discovering a secret family correspondence that had been happening my entire life. My parents had been talking to my siblings in their heads for decades, imagining their responses, maintaining relationships that existed only in their own minds. "This changes how I see everything," Marcus said quietly. "You weren't just people who gave us away. You were parents who never stopped parenting, even when you couldn't be with us." The goodbyes the next morning were awkward but hopeful. We exchanged phone numbers and made tentative plans. Elena promised to send a video call link so we could meet her children. Marcus said he'd mail photos from his latest conservation project. David committed to monthly visits to Portland. 3 months later, I flew to Phoenix for Elena's daughter Sophie's 5th birthday party. Watching my nephew and niece blow out candles while surrounded by their extended family, including their aunt, uncles, and grandparents they were just getting to know, felt like watching a small miracle. We're not a normal family, and we never will be. Too much time passed, too many separate lives were built, but we're something new, a family that chose each other as adults, with full knowledge of our complicated history. Marcus still calls our parents Robert and Margaret, not Mom and Dad, but he sends them photos from his ranger work and calls on holidays. David brings his girlfriend to family dinners and talks to Dad about home renovation projects. Elena's children know they have extra grandparents who love them, even if the relationship feels different from their other relatives. And me? I finally understand that the sadness I felt growing up wasn't about missing siblings I'd never known. It was about sensing the grief my parents carried every day while trying to give me a normal childhood. The house on Maple Street isn't quiet anymore. My siblings' childhood rooms have been converted back into actual bedrooms for visits. The walls are covered with new family photos, awkward but genuine pictures of people learning to love each other despite decades of separation. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would have been like if the fire never happened, if my mother hadn't developed an addiction, if the court system had worked differently. But those alternate realities belong to different people. This is our story, messy, complicated, and real. A family that was broken apart and found a way to build something new from the pieces that remained. 6 months after our first family reunion, I thought we'd found our rhythm. Weekly video calls, monthly visits, shared holidays. It felt like we were successfully building something meaningful from the wreckage of our past. But families are complicated, and ours was about to get even more complex. It started with a phone call from Rachel Martinez, the private investigator. I was at work, counseling a teenager whose parents were going through a messy divorce when her name appeared on my caller ID. "Lucy, I need to see you," Rachel said without preamble. "There's something about your family case that I didn't tell you before." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me tonight?" That evening, I sat across from Rachel at the same coffee shop where she'd first revealed the truth about my siblings. This time, her expression was even more serious. "When I was investigating your family's court records, I found some inconsistencies that bothered me," she began. "Small details that didn't quite add up. I kept digging, and I discovered something that changes everything you think you know about that night of the fire." She pulled out a new set of documents I'd never seen before. Police reports, witness statements, insurance claims, papers that painted a very different picture of the events in 1994. "The fire wasn't an accident, Lucy." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother didn't fall asleep while cooking. The fire started in the basement, not the kitchen. Someone deliberately set it, and your parents covered it up to protect one of your siblings." Rachel showed me the arson investigator's report. The fire had definitely been intentionally set, using gasoline and matches. The basement showed clear evidence of accelerant use, and the burn patterns were consistent with arson. "But why would my parents lie about that?" "Because the person who set the fire was 6-year-old Elena." I stared at the documents, unable to process what I was reading. That's impossible. Elena was just a child. "Children can and do set fires, Lucy. It's more common than people think, especially in homes where there's stress, trauma, or major changes." According to the police report, Elena had been displaying concerning behaviors for months before the fire. Killing small animals, hurting other children, stealing. Rachel showed me psychological evaluations that had been sealed with the court records. Elena had been diagnosed with conduct disorder following the fire. The behaviors exhibited, the animal cruelty, the aggression toward her brothers, the fire setting, were classic warning signs of serious psychological problems. "Your parents faced an impossible situation," Rachel continued. "They could tell the truth about Elena setting the fire, which would likely result in her being institutionalized or placed in a specialized facility. Or they could create a cover story that kept the family together while getting Elena the help she needed. The cover story about Mom's prescription drug addiction and falling asleep while cooking had been carefully constructed. Margaret had agreed to enter addiction treatment she didn't actually need and accept the blame for criminal neglect to protect Elena from being labeled a dangerous child. But the court separated us anyway," I said. "Yes, but with a very different trajectory than if Elena had been identified as the arsonist. Instead of being placed in a psychiatric facility, she went to a loving family who specialized in helping children with behavioral problems.
Carlos and Maria Rodriguez weren't just random adoptive parents. They were specifically chosen because of their experience with troubled children. I felt sick. Does Elena know? That's what I can't determine from the records. The psychological evaluations stop when she was placed with the Rodriguez family. Either she was successfully treated and the memories were suppressed, or the Rodriguez family chose never to tell her the truth. Driving home that night, my mind was racing. Everything I thought I knew about our family's tragedy was wrong. Elena hadn't been an innocent victim of circumstance. She'd been a deeply troubled child whose actions had destroyed our family. But then I thought about the Elena I'd gotten to know over the past 6 months. She was a dedicated teacher who went out of her way to help struggling students. She was a loving mother and wife. She devoted her life to nurturing and protecting children. Was it possible that a 6-year-old fire setter had grown up to become someone so fundamentally caring? Or was there still something dark lurking beneath the surface? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Elena's compulsive need to help troubled children, her admission that she saw herself in every child who looked lost or alone. Was that genuine empathy, or was it something else entirely? The next morning, I called Marcus. If anyone would give me a straight answer about Elena's childhood behavior, it would be him. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, what's going on? Do you remember anything strange about Elena before the fire? Any behaviors that worried you or your parents? The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Marcus? Why are you asking me this, Lucy? His tone told me everything I needed to know. You remember, don't you? Some things are better left buried. Not this time. I hired the private investigator again. I know Elena set the fire. Marcus let out a long breath. David and I have never talked about this, not even to each other. We made a pact when we were kids at the ranch that we'd never tell anyone. Tell me what you remember. Elena was different. She hurt things, small animals mostly, but sometimes David and me too. She'd pinch us until we cried or pull our hair when no one was looking. She'd blame us for things she did and watch while we got in trouble. Marcus described a pattern of behavior that was far more disturbing than anything in the police reports. Elena had been manipulative and cruel, but only when adults weren't watching. She'd learned to put on a sweet, innocent face around parents while terrorizing her brothers in private. The night of the fire, she came into our bedroom and told us she was going to make the monsters go away. We thought she was talking about a nightmare or something. We found out later that she'd been calling our parents monsters because they'd been fighting about money. Did you see her set the fire? No, but we smelled the gasoline. David and I snuck downstairs and saw Elena coming up from the basement with matches in her hand. She looked happy, excited, like she'd accomplished something important. Why didn't you tell anyone? We were 3 and 5 years old, Lucy. We barely understood what was happening. By the time we were old enough to really comprehend what Elena had done, we were in foster care, and our family was already destroyed. What was the point of making it worse? After hanging up with Marcus, I called David and got essentially the same story. Both my brothers had spent their entire lives carrying the secret that their sister had deliberately destroyed their family. The hardest part, David said, was watching Elena play the victim for all these years. She got a loving, adoptive family, a stable childhood, a normal life, all while the rest of us dealt with the trauma of what she'd done. But she seems so different now, I protested. She's a teacher, a mother. She spends her life helping children. Lucy, I work with damaged kids every day. Some of them genuinely heal and become healthy adults. Others just get better at hiding their problems. I honestly don't know which category Elena falls into. I was faced with a terrible dilemma. Do I confront Elena with the truth about her past? Do I tell her children that their mother had once been capable of violence? Do I warn my parents that the daughter they'd sacrificed everything to protect might still be dangerous? Or do I trust that the loving, nurturing woman I'd come to know over the past 6 months was the real Elena, and that whatever darkness had existed in the troubled 6-year-old had been successfully treated and resolved? The decision became more urgent when Elena called me the next week with exciting news. "Lucy, I have something wonderful to tell you. Carlos and Maria want to meet you and our parents. They're planning a trip to Portland next month, and they want to have a big family dinner with everyone." Carlos and Maria Rodriguez, the people who knew the truth about Elena's past, who had raised her through her treatment and recovery. This could be my chance to get answers about whether Elena had been successfully rehabilitated or if she was still potentially dangerous. But it could also be the moment when our carefully reconstructed family relationships exploded completely. "That sounds great, Elena," I heard myself saying. "I can't wait to meet them." As I hung up the phone, I realized I was about to enter the most complicated family dinner of my life. The question wasn't just whether Elena remembered setting the fire that destroyed our childhood. It was whether the people who'd raised her believed she was truly safe to be around the family she'd once tried to eliminate. The dinner was set for Saturday evening at my parents' house. Elena had flown up from Phoenix with Carlos and Maria Rodriguez, while Marcus and David drove down for what we all knew would be the most significant family gathering since our reunion 6 months earlier. I arrived early to help Mom prepare, but really, I wanted to observe Carlos and Maria when they first entered the house where Elena had committed arson as a child. Their reactions might tell me everything I needed to know about whether they considered Elena truly rehabilitated or still potentially dangerous. Carlos Rodriguez was a tall, gentle-looking man in his 60s with graying hair and kind eyes. Maria was petite with silver-streaked black hair and the warm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades working with troubled children. When they walked into the living room, they moved with the careful awareness of people accustomed to managing volatile situations. "Robert, Margaret," Carlos said, embracing my parents, "thank you for welcoming us into your home." The weight of that statement wasn't lost on anyone. These were the people who'd raised the child who'd tried to burn this house down. Elena seemed oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. She was animated and happy, introducing her adoptive parents to the family she'd been reunited with, pointing out childhood photos on the mantelpiece, and describing the preserved bedrooms upstairs. Marcus and David arrived together, and I watched Carlos and Maria carefully as Elena introduced them as my brothers. Both adoptive parents studied my brothers' faces intently, as if searching for signs of recognition or fear. "Elena has told us so much about finding you all again," Maria said to Marcus. "She's been incredibly happy since reconnecting with her biological family." "Has she?" David asked, and his social worker instincts were clearly engaged. "What has she told you about us?" "Just that she'd found her siblings after thinking she was alone all these years," Carlos replied. "She's been planning this reunion for weeks." During cocktails before dinner, I found myself in the kitchen with Maria while she helped Mom arrange appetizers. This felt like my opportunity to get some answers. "Maria, can I ask you something about Elena's childhood with you?" She paused in arranging cheese and crackers. "Of course, dear." "When you adopted her, did the social workers tell you anything about behavioral issues?" Maria's hands stilled completely. She looked at me with the sharp assessment of someone deciding how much truth to reveal. "What exactly are you asking, Lucy?" "I know about the fire. I know Elena said it." Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "How long have you known?" "About a week. My private investigator found the sealed records. Marcus and David confirmed what they remembered from that night." "And Elena doesn't know that you know?" "No, I wanted to talk to you first. Is she safe? Should I be worried about her being around my family?" Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked directly into my eyes. "Elena was one of the most disturbed children Carlos and I ever worked with. When she came to us at age 6, she showed no empathy, no remorse, and no ability to form genuine emotional connections. The fire wasn't her first act of violence, just the most destructive." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "She'd killed neighborhood cats, set smaller fires in the yard, and deliberately hurt other children. She was diagnosed with conduct disorder with callous unemotional traits, what many people would call early signs of psychopathy. The woman I'd come to know as my caring, nurturing sister had once been a child psychopath. But she seems so normal now. She's a teacher, a mother. Elena underwent intensive therapy for 12 years, cognitive behavioral therapy, medication, constant supervision. She learned to mimic appropriate emotional responses and social behaviors. She became very good at appearing normal. Appearing normal? You mean she's still... I mean that Elena learned to function in society by carefully copying what healthy people do. She studied empathy like other children study math. She memorized the correct responses to emotional situations. Whether she actually feels those emotions or just performs them convincingly, that's something Carlos and I have debated for 20 years. My legs felt weak. Why did you let her become a teacher? Why did you let her have children? Because she's never shown any signs of violence since age 8. She follows rules meticulously, never breaks laws, and maintains stable relationships. She's been a model citizen for over 2 decades. But do you trust her? Maria hesitated just long enough to give me my answer. I trust that Elena values her reputation and her life too much to do anything that would jeopardize them. Whether that's the same thing as trusting her, I honestly don't know. Before I could ask more questions, Elena bounced into the kitchen. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" "Just sharing embarrassing stories about you as a child," Maria said smoothly, her acting skills as polished as Elena's apparently were. "Oh no, don't tell Lucy about my awkward phase," Elena laughed, but I noticed she was studying both our faces carefully. During dinner, I watched Elena with new eyes. Every gesture, every expression, every emotional response was suddenly suspect. When she talked about her students with apparent affection, was she genuinely caring or performing care? When she showed pictures of her children with obvious pride, was she feeling motherly love or mimicking what mothers are supposed to feel? The conversation turned to childhood memories, and Elena shared stories about growing up with Carlos and Maria that painted a picture of a normal, happy family life. But I noticed that Marcus and David barely spoke, and when they did, they avoided making eye contact with Elena. "Elena," Dad said during dessert, "Carlos and Maria did such a wonderful job raising you. You've become an amazing woman." "I had the best parents," Elena said, squeezing Maria's hand. "They saved my life." The irony was devastating. Elena credited Carlos and Maria with saving her life, while my biological parents had sacrificed their family to protect her from the consequences of her actions. Everyone at that table, except Elena, knew the truth about what she'd done, and everyone was pretending it had never happened. After dinner, Elena wanted to show Carlos and Maria her preserved childhood bedroom. As we climbed the stairs, Carlos quietly pulled me aside. "Maria told me you know about Elena's past." "Yes, I'm terrified." "Elena has lived a completely normal life for 22 years. She's never hurt anyone, never shown any signs of her childhood problems. But, but? But she also has no idea that we know about her past. The official story she believes is that her biological parents abandoned her due to drug problems and financial issues. She thinks the fire was an accident that happened while she was sleeping." I stopped walking. "She doesn't remember setting the fire?" "She claims not to. Whether that's genuine repressed memory or calculated deception, we've never been able to determine." We reached Elena's childhood bedroom, where she was showing Maria the dollhouse and stuffed rabbit that had been waiting for her return. Elena picked up the rabbit and held it close. "I dreamed about this room for years," she said softly. "I always hoped I'd come home someday." Watching her in that moment, surrounded by the remnants of the childhood that ended when she burned down her family's life, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were said, Elena hugged each of us tightly. "I'm so grateful we found each other again," she whispered to me. "I finally feel complete." After everyone left, I sat with my parents in the living room where this whole journey had begun.
Did you know Carlos and Maria told me the truth about Elena? I asked. Mom nodded. We hoped they would. You deserved to know what you were getting into. Are you afraid of her? Dad considered the question carefully. I'm afraid of the child she was, but the woman she's become, she's been nothing but loving and appropriate with us. Whether that's genuine or performed, I don't know if it matters anymore. It matters to me. Why? Because she has children, Dad. If there's any chance she's still dangerous. Her children are healthy, happy, well-adjusted kids, Mom said. If Elena was still the disturbed child she once was, wouldn't we see signs of it in how she raises them? I wanted to believe that was true, but as I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the image of Elena holding that stuffed rabbit in her childhood bedroom, the room of a child who'd once been capable of trying to kill her entire family. 3 weeks later, Elena called with more family news. She was pregnant with her third child and wanted to name the baby Lucy if it was a girl, after the sister she'd lost and found again. As I congratulated her, I found myself wondering, was this genuine sisterly love from a woman who genuinely healed from her troubled past? Or was it something else entirely, a performance by someone who'd learned to mimic human emotions that even she might believe they were real? I may never know the answer to that question, but I've learned that sometimes the most important thing about family isn't whether people are perfect or even entirely trustworthy. Sometimes it's about choosing to love them anyway, while staying alert enough to protect yourself and others if necessary. Elena remains my sister, the one who calls every week, sends photos of her children, and includes me in every family celebration. She's also the sister who once tried to burn down our house with us inside it. Both of those things can be true at the same time. And maybe, in the end, that's what real family is. Learning to love people completely while never forgetting who they really are. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.